The dust was still settling on the main street of Mojave, California, when Jackson Ashford heard the sound that would change his life forever. A woman's broken sobs cutting through the hot desert air of that sweltering August afternoon in 1882. He had ridden into town less than an hour ago, his horse tired from the long journey across the Mojave Desert, his canteen nearly empty, and his spirits low after 3 months of driving cattle north for a rancher who had paid him half of what was promised. Jackson had planned to rest for a day, maybe 2, before heading toward the coast where he heard work was plentiful. At 26 years old, he had been drifting from town to town for the better part of 5 years, never staying long enough to put down roots, never letting anyone get close enough to matter. But that sound stopped him cold. Jackson turned his horse toward the commotion and saw a small crowd gathered outside a modest house on the eastern edge of town. A portly man in a fine suit was directing 2 rough-looking men who were carrying furniture and boxes out of the house and loading them onto a wagon. A woman stood on the porch, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now fell in waves around her shoulders. Her dress was simple but clean, a faded blue calico that had been mended in several places. Even in her distress, there was something about her that caught Jackson's attention and held it. Perhaps it was the way she stood despite her tears, her spine straight even as her world was apparently falling apart around her. Jackson dismounted and approached an older woman who stood at the edge of the crowd, her weathered face creased with sympathy. "What is happening here?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The woman glanced at him, taking in his dusty clothes and the worn gun belt at his hip. "That is Oliver Whitmore, the banker from over in San Bernardino. The girl is Ophelia Navarro. Her father died 3 months back, left her with debts she cannot pay. Whitmore is taking everything to settle the accounts." Jackson watched as the 2 men emerged from the house carrying a rocking chair. The young woman, Ophelia, let out a cry and rushed forward. "Please, not that," she begged, her voice raw with emotion. "That was my mother's chair. She died when I was born, and it is all I have left of her." Whitmore barely glanced at her. "Your father used it as collateral, Miss Navarro. Everything in this house now belongs to the bank." "But surely there must be some mistake," Ophelia said, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "My father would never have borrowed so much. He was a careful man." "Careful men do not die leaving their daughters penniless," Whitmore said coldly. "The debt is what it is. You have until sundown to vacate the premises." Jackson felt something hot and sharp twist in his chest. He had seen plenty of hard things in his years roaming the frontier. He had witnessed violence and cruelty and indifference. But there was something about watching this woman lose everything, about the callousness in the banker's voice, that stirred something long dormant inside him. Before he could think better of it, Jackson stepped forward. "How much does she owe?" Whitmore turned, his small eyes assessing Jackson with obvious disdain. "And who might you be?" "Someone asking a question," Jackson replied evenly. "How much is the debt?" $347, Whitmore said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Not that it concerns you, Cowboy." It was a substantial sum, more than most working men saw in a year. Jackson had exactly $412 in his saddlebag, money he had been saving for 3 years with the vague notion that someday he might buy a small piece of land and build something of his own. It represented every dollar he had in the world, every sacrifice, every long day under the brutal sun. He looked at Ophelia. She had turned to stare at him, her tear-stained face a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. Her eyes were a startling green, bright even in her distress. "I will pay it," Jackson heard himself say. "I will pay her debt and buy back everything you have taken." The crowd murmured in surprise. Whitmore's eyebrows shot up. "You will pay $347 for a stranger, plus whatever you are charging for the items already on the wagon," Jackson added. Whitmore's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "The furniture and possessions are valued at another $63. $410 total," Jackson said. He walked back to his horse and retrieved his saddlebag, aware that every eye was on him. His hands were steady as he counted out the money, though his mind was screaming that he was a fool. He returned to Whitmore and held out the cash. The banker counted it carefully, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble. When he finished, he nodded and tucked the money into his coat pocket. "Very well, the debt is satisfied," he gestured to his men. "Put everything back." The two men grumbled but began unloading the wagon. Whitmore climbed onto the seat and picked up the reins. Before he left, he looked down at Jackson with something almost like pity. "You are either the most noble fool I have ever met, or the most foolish," he said. "Either way, you will regret this kindness." Then he was gone, the wagon rumbling back down the street toward the main road. Jackson stood there feeling the weight of what he had just done settle over him like a physical thing. He had given away his entire future for a woman whose name he barely knew. The old woman who had spoken to him earlier patted his arm as she walked past. "That was a fine thing you did, young man. God will remember it." The crowd began to disperse, some people nodding at Jackson with approval, others shaking their heads at his foolishness. Soon it was just Jackson and Ophelia, and the two men still carrying furniture back into the house. Ophelia approached him slowly, as if he might vanish if she moved too quickly. Up close, he could see that her green eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and there was a small scar on her chin that somehow made her more beautiful rather than less. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do such a thing for someone you do not even know?" Jackson did not have a good answer. He was not even sure he understood it himself. "I do not know," he admitted. "It seemed like the right thing to do." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different from the ones before. "I do not even know your name." "Jackson Ashford." "Jackson Ashford," she repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "I am Ophelia Navarro, and I owe you my life." "You do not owe me anything," Jackson said quickly. "Consider it a gift with no strings attached." But even as he said it, he knew it was not entirely true. He wanted something, though he could not yet name what it was. He wanted to stay in this dusty desert town for a while. He wanted to understand why this woman's tears had affected him so deeply. He wanted to know if those green eyes would look at him with something other than gratitude. "The least I can do is offer you a meal," Ophelia said, wiping at her face with her sleeve. "And a place to rest if you need it. The house is small, but there is a barn out back where you could sleep if you have nowhere else to go." Jackson should have declined. He should have gotten back on his horse and ridden away before he became any more entangled in this situation. But instead, he found himself nodding. "I would appreciate that. Thank you." The two men finished moving everything back inside and left without a word. Ophelia stood on the porch, looking at her home as if seeing it for the first time. "I thought I had lost it all," she said softly. "This house, these things, they are all I have left of my family. My mother died giving birth to me, and my father raised me alone. He was a freight driver, bringing supplies from Los Angeles to the mining camps farther east. 3 months ago, his wagon overturned on a mountain pass. They said he died instantly." "I am sorry for your loss," Jackson said, and meant it. "I knew there were debts," Ophelia continued. "My father had borrowed money to buy new wagons, new equipment. He thought if he could expand the business, we would finally be secure. But then he died, and I could not run the freight business alone. I tried to sell the wagons, but I got far less than they were worth. It was not enough. I have been living on borrowed time, waiting for the day when someone would come to take it all away. That day is over now, Jackson said. The debt is paid. Ophelia turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. But at what cost to you? That was a fortune you gave to that horrible man. Jackson shrugged, trying to appear more casual than he felt. It was just money. I will earn more. Just money, she repeated, shaking her head in wonder. You speak as if $400 were nothing. It was everything I had, Jackson admitted, but it is done now. No use dwelling on it. Ophelia was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Then I will make you the best meal I can manage. It is the least I can do. She led him inside the house. It was small but neat, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. The rocking chair that had caused such distress sat by the fireplace, its wood worn smooth by years of use. There were curtains on the windows, embroidered with small flowers, and a braided rug on the floor. It was clear that despite her poverty, Ophelia took pride in her home. You can wash up at the pump out back, she said, gesturing toward the rear of the house. I will start cooking. Jackson did as she suggested, stripping off his shirt and splashing himself with the cool water from the pump. The desert heat was relentless even as the afternoon wore on, and it felt good to wash away the layers of dust and sweat. When he returned inside, Ophelia was at the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled of onions and meat. I hope you like stew, she said without turning around. It is all I have the ingredients for at the moment. Stew sounds perfect, Jackson replied. He sat down at the small table and watched her work. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands sure despite the trembling he had seen earlier. She had pulled her hair back into a loose braid, revealing the elegant line of her neck. They ate in silence at first, both of them too hungry and too overwhelmed by the day's events to make conversation. But gradually, as the immediate edge of hunger faded, they began to talk. Ophelia told him about growing up in Mojave, about how the town had changed over the years as more people moved west seeking their fortunes. She spoke of her father with obvious love, describing how he had taught her to read and write, how he had treated her not as a burden but as a blessing despite the loss of his wife. Jackson found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about his own childhood in Texas, about the family ranch that had been lost when he was 15 after a brutal drought killed most of the cattle. He spoke of his parents' death from fever the following winter and how he had been drifting ever since, unable or unwilling to settle in one place. You have been alone a long time, Ophelia observed. So have you, Jackson countered. She smiled, a small sad expression that did not quite reach her eyes. Yes, I suppose we have that in common. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red, Jackson rose to leave. I should get my horse settled in your barn if that offer still stands. Of course, Ophelia said, standing as well. Let me show you. The barn was small but sturdy, with enough room for 2 horses and a modest amount of hay and grain. Jackson unsaddled his horse and made sure the animal had food and water. Ophelia had brought out a few blankets and a pillow. It is not much, she said apologetically, but it should be more comfortable than sleeping on the ground. It is perfect, Jackson assured her. Thank you. She hesitated in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. Jackson, I want you to know that what you did today was the most extraordinary act of kindness I have ever witnessed. I know you said I owe you nothing, but I hope you will let me try to repay you somehow. You do not need to repay me, Jackson said. but I would like to stay in town for a while if you do not mind. Maybe help you with repairs around the house or whatever needs doing. I am good with my hands and I am not afraid of hard work." "I would like that," Ophelia said softly. "I would like that very much." After she left, Jackson lay on the blankets and stared up at the barn's rafters. He should be furious with himself for his impulsive decision. He should be regretting the loss of his savings. But instead, all he could think about was Ophelia's green eyes and the way she had smiled at him across the dinner table. A real smile this time that had transformed her entire face. He had spent 5 years running from connection, from the possibility of loss. But today, for reasons he still could not fully articulate, he had run straight toward it instead. And surprisingly, he did not regret it at all. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Jackson rose early each morning and set about repairing the various things around Ophelia's property that had fallen into disrepair. He fixed the broken porch railing, patched the roof where it leaked, and rebuilt the fence around the small garden. Ophelia protested at first that he was doing too much, but he waved off her concerns. "You are giving me room and board," he pointed out. "The least I can do is make myself useful." The truth was, he enjoyed the work. There was satisfaction in fixing things, in seeing tangible results from his labor. And there was pleasure in Ophelia's company. She would bring him water when the sun was high, or sit on the porch in the evening and talk with him as the desert cooled. He learned more about her with each passing day. She was intelligent and well-read, despite having little formal education. Her father had owned a small collection of books, and she had read each one multiple times. She was practical and hardworking, tending her garden and keeping the house spotless. But she also had a playful side that emerged gradually, a sense of humor that caught Jackson off guard and made him laugh in a way he had not in years. For her part, Ophelia found herself drawn to this quiet cowboy who had changed her life so dramatically. Jackson was not like the other men she had known in Mojave. He was thoughtful and gentle, but there was also a strength in him that went beyond the physical. He listened when she spoke, really listened as if her words mattered. And he never made her feel like a burden or an obligation, even though she knew he must regret giving away his entire fortune for her sake. 2 weeks after Jackson's arrival, they were sitting on the porch as the sun set, watching the shadows lengthen across the desert. Ophelia had been unusually quiet all day, and Jackson could sense something was troubling her. "What is on your mind?" he asked gently. Ophelia was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the arm of the rocking chair. "I have been thinking about what I should do next," she finally said. "I cannot keep living on charity. I need to find work, but there is not much available for a woman alone in a town this size." "You are not living on charity," Jackson said firmly. "You have been feeding me and housing me for 2 weeks. If anything, I am the one living on your generosity." "You know that is not the same," Ophelia replied. "You have given me everything. I need to find a way to stand on my own feet." Jackson understood her need for independence, even admired it. But the thought of her leaving, of this fragile connection between them being broken, made his chest tighten with unexpected panic. "What if you did not have to figure it out alone?" he heard himself say. Ophelia turned to look at him, her expression puzzled. "What do you mean?" Jackson took a deep breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff but unable to stop himself. "What if we became partners? You have this house, this land. It is not much, but it is something. I have skills and a strong back. Together, maybe we could build something, start a business or a small ranch, something that belongs to both of us." "Jackson, I cannot ask you to do that," Ophelia said, but he could hear the longing in her voice. "You have already sacrificed so much for me." "You are not asking," Jackson pointed out. "I am offering. And it would not be a sacrifice. It would be an investment in a future I actually want, instead of just drifting aimlessly from place to place." Ophelia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this? Why are you being so kind to me?" It was the same question she had asked that first day, and Jackson still did not have a complete answer. But he was beginning to understand his own motivations a bit better. "Because when I heard you crying that day, something in me recognized something in you," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I have been alone and adrift for so long, convinced that was all I deserved or could hope for. But then I saw you standing there, fighting to hold on to the pieces of your life, and I thought maybe there was still something worth fighting for in this world. Maybe I could be part of something good instead of just existing." A tear slipped down Ophelia's cheek. "You are part of something good, Jackson. You have been nothing but good since the moment you arrived." "Then let me stay," Jackson said. "Let me be your partner in business if nothing else. We can figure out the details as we go." Ophelia wiped at her eyes and nodded. "All right. Yes, partners." Jackson felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been carrying for so long that he had forgotten it was there. "Partners," he agreed. They shook hands formally, both of them smiling at the solemnity of the gesture. But as their hands touched, Jackson felt a spark of something more than partnership, something electric that made his breath catch. From the way Ophelia's eyes widened, he suspected she felt it too. Over the following weeks, they threw themselves into planning their future. After much discussion, they decided to start a small freight business, using Ophelia's knowledge of her father's routes and Jackson's ability to handle horses and wagons. They would need to buy a wagon and a team, which meant saving every penny they could. Jackson took odd jobs around Mojave, working for the blacksmith, helping at the general store, and occasionally hiring himself out as a guide to travelers heading east into the desert. Ophelia took in sewing and laundry, her skilled hands commanding fair prices from the town's better-off residents. It was hard work and long hours, but they were building something together, and that made all the difference. As they worked side by side, their friendship deepened into something more profound. Jackson found himself thinking about Ophelia constantly when they were apart, and savoring every moment when they were together. He noticed small things about her, like the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, or how she hummed while she worked in the garden. He noticed how the setting sun turned her auburn hair to fire, and how her laughter could chase away the weariness of the longest day. For Ophelia, Jackson had become the center of her world in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. She had grown up believing she would never marry, that no man would want a woman with no dowry and no prospects. But Jackson had proven that belief wrong simply by existing, by seeing value in her when everyone else saw only debt and burden. She found herself imagining a future that went beyond mere partnership, a future where they might share more than just business interests. But neither of them spoke of these growing feelings. The memory of that first handshake and the electricity that had passed between them hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not acted upon. They were both afraid, in their own ways, of ruining what they had built. 3 months after Jackson's arrival in Mojave, they had saved enough money to buy a used wagon and a team of 4 sturdy horses. It was not much compared to what Ophelia's father had owned at the height of his business, but it was a start. They celebrated that evening with a special dinner that Ophelia prepared, complete with a bottle of wine that Jackson had splurged on despite their tight budget. "To new beginnings," Jackson said, raising his glass. "To partnership," Ophelia added, touching her glass to his. They drank and then fell silent, both of them suddenly aware of how close they were sitting at the small table, how the lamplight cast intimate shadows across the room. "Jackson," Ophelia said softly, "can I ask you something? Anything? Do you ever regret it? Giving away all your money that day?" Jackson set down his glass and looked at her directly. "Not even for a second. That money bought me something far more valuable than land or cattle or security." "What did it buy you?" Ophelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You," Jackson said simply. "It bought me you, Ophelia. And even if you never feel the same way I do, even if we remain nothing more than business partners for the rest of our lives, it will still have been worth every penny." Ophelia's breath caught. "The same way you do." "Jackson, what are you saying?" He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you. I think I started falling that very first day when I saw you standing there refusing to crumble even as your world fell apart. And I have been falling ever since, a little more each day, until now I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears streamed down Ophelia's face, but she was smiling, her green eyes blazing with emotion. "You foolish, wonderful man. Do you really think I could spend every day with you, work beside you, laugh with you, and not fall in love with you too?" Jackson felt as if the earth had shifted beneath him. "You love me." "I love you," Ophelia confirmed. "I have been trying so hard not to because I was afraid you would leave, afraid I would lose you the way I have lost everyone else. But I cannot help it. I love you, Jackson Ashford." Jackson stood and pulled her to her feet and into his arms. For a moment, they just held each other, both of them trembling with the intensity of their emotions. Then Jackson cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, and it was like coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Ophelia's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with a passion that took his breath away. And gentle became fierce, became desperate, became a promise of everything they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know I have nothing to offer you but hard work and uncertainty, but marry me anyway. Be my wife, my partner in everything, not just business." "Yes," Ophelia said without hesitation. "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. The preacher was a kindly older man who had known Ophelia since she was a child, and he seemed genuinely pleased to see her happiness. There were no guests beyond a handful of townspeople who had befriended them over the months, but neither Jackson nor Ophelia minded. All that mattered was the vows they made to each other, the promises to love and honor and cherish through whatever trials lay ahead. Ophelia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Jackson had bought a new shirt for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Jackson kissed her in front of their small audience, Ophelia felt as if her heart might burst from sheer joy. That night, as they lay together in the house that now belonged to both of them, Ophelia traced the line of Jackson's jaw with her fingers. "I cannot believe this is real," she murmured. "6 months ago, I thought I had lost everything. Now I have more than I ever dreamed possible." Jackson caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "We have more," he corrected gently. "We have each other, and we have a chance to build something lasting. That is more than most people ever get." "I know," Ophelia said. "And I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of what you gave up for me." "You do not need to prove anything," Jackson said firmly. "You already are worthy. You always have been." They made love then, gently and passionately, learning the contours of each other's bodies, discovering new ways to express the love that had grown between them. And later, as Ophelia drifted off to sleep in Jackson's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had heard her crying and changed her life forever. The freight business started slowly, but grew steadily over the next 2 years. Jackson proved to be a skilled driver and negotiator, able to secure contracts with mining camps and settlements throughout the region. Ophelia managed the books and the scheduling, her organizational skills ensuring that they never missed a delivery or failed to collect payment. They worked long hours and saved diligently, reinvesting most of their profits back into the business. By their second anniversary, they owned 3 wagons and had hired 2 other drivers to help with the increased workload. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were building something together that felt meaningful and lasting. Their love had only deepened with time. The passion of those early days had settled into something richer and more profound, a connection that went beyond physical attraction or romantic infatuation. They were true partners in every sense of the word, trusting each other completely, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating each other's successes. But there was one shadow on their happiness. After 2 years of marriage, Ophelia had not yet conceived a child. She tried not to let it bother her, tried to focus on the blessings she had rather than dwelling on what she lacked. But sometimes, late at night when she thought Jackson was asleep, he would feel her quietly crying beside him. "Talk to me," he would say, pulling her close. "Tell me what is troubling you." "I want to give you a child," Ophelia would admit. "I want us to have a family, but month after month nothing happens. What if I am barren? What if I can never give you children?" "Then we will have each other," Jackson would say firmly. "Ophelia, I married you because I love you, not because I wanted you to bear my children. If we are blessed with a family, then wonderful. But if we are not, it does not change how I feel about you or the life we have built together." His words would comfort her, but Jackson could see the longing in her eyes whenever they passed a woman with a baby in town, or when their employees spoke of their own children. He wished he could give her what she so desperately wanted, but this was one problem he could not solve through hard work or determination. Then, in the spring of 1885, Ophelia fainted while working in the garden. Jackson, who had been repairing one of the wagons nearby, rushed to her side in terror. He carried her into the house and was about to ride for the doctor when she opened her eyes. "I am all right," she said, though her face was pale. "I just felt dizzy suddenly." "I am getting the doctor," Jackson insisted. The doctor arrived within the hour and examined Ophelia thoroughly. When he emerged from the bedroom, he was smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Ashford. Your wife is going to have a baby." Jackson felt as if he had been struck by lightning. "A baby?" "Are you certain?" "Quite certain," the doctor said. "She is about 3 months along, I would estimate. You can expect the child around October." Jackson burst into the bedroom to find Ophelia sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, but with a smile that could have lit up the entire desert. "We are going to have a baby," she said, her voice full of wonder. Jackson gathered her into his arms, feeling his own eyes burn with tears. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, as if saying it would make it more real. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Ophelia suffered from terrible sickness in the early months. But Jackson was attentive and devoted, taking over most of her duties and hiring additional help so she could rest. He would not hear of her doing anything strenuous, despite her protests that she was pregnant, not fragile. "You are carrying our child," he would say. "That is the most important work there is right now. Everything else can wait." Their son was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. He was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Jackson held him for the first time with shaking hands, awed by the tiny life they had created. "What should we name him?" Ophelia asked, exhausted but radiant. Jackson looked down at his son, then at his wife, and felt a surge of love so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. "What about Joshua? It means God is salvation, and in a way that feels right. God saved us when he brought us together." "Joshua Ashford," Ophelia said, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Joshua. Welcome to the world." Joshua was a strong, healthy baby who grew quickly. He had his father's determination and his mother's intelligence, and he was the absolute center of his parents' universe. Jackson would come home from long days on the road and immediately reach for his son, talking to him about everything and nothing while Ophelia prepared dinner. She would watch them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter into the family. They named her Emma, and she had her father's dark hair and a personality that made itself known from day one. Where Joshua was thoughtful and quiet, Emma was bold and boisterous, keeping her parents constantly on their toes. The freight business continued to prosper. By the late 1880s, the Ashfords were one of the most respected business owners in Mojave. They had expanded beyond freight to include a small general store, and they employed more than a dozen people. The little house that Ophelia had nearly lost to the banker's greed had been expanded and improved, though they kept the original structure intact, including the rocking chair that had started everything. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Ophelia out to a hill overlooking the desert where they could watch the sunset. The children were with a trusted friend for the evening, giving them a rare moment of solitude. "You remember the first time we sat together watching the sun set?" Jackson asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I remember everything about those early days," Ophelia replied. "I remember how terrified I was, how lost I felt, and I remember how you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to say." "I think about that day often," Jackson admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, to ignoring your tears and continuing on my way. My whole life would have been different if I had made that choice." "Our whole lives would have been different," Ophelia corrected. "I would have lost the house, probably ended up working in some saloon or laundry, alone and struggling to survive. Instead, I have you and our children and a life beyond my wildest dreams." "I gave you $400, Jackson said. "You gave me everything." "I think I got the better end of that bargain." Ophelia laughed and kissed him. "We both got exactly what we needed. That is the magic of it." As the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over the desert they had both learned to call home. It had not been an easy decade. They had faced drought years and economic downturns, illness and injury, the thousand small challenges that came with building a life from nothing. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. "I have been thinking," Ophelia said after a while, "about expansion. There is a route opening up toward the coast that could be very profitable, but it would require significant investment and some risk." "Tell me more," Jackson said, always interested in her business ideas. They talked long into the evening about plans and possibilities, about dreams for the future and hopes for their children. It was the kind of conversation they had been having for 10 years, the kind that had built their business and their life together. But now it was enriched by a decade of shared experiences, by the deep knowledge of each other that came only with time. When they finally headed home, riding slowly under the stars, Jackson reached over and took Ophelia's hand. "I love you," he said. "I know I tell you that every day, but I need you to know how much I mean it. You are my best friend, my partner, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. I would give up everything all over again just to see you smile." "You do not have to give up anything," Ophelia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Because we already have everything that matters. We have each other and we have the life we built together. That is more valuable than all the money in the world." She was right, Jackson knew. That day in 1882, when he had emptied his saddlebag to pay off a stranger's debt, he had thought he was sacrificing his future. But instead, he had been investing in it. He had traded money for meaning, security for love, and it had been the best decision of his life. The years continued to pass, marked by both triumphs and trials. Joshua grew into a serious young man who showed an aptitude for business, while Emma remained wild and free-spirited, more interested in exploring the desert than learning her letters. The freight business evolved with the changing times, eventually incorporating some of the new railroad routes that were transforming the West. Jackson's hair started to show threads of silver, and Ophelia developed fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting in the desert sun. But to each other, they remained as beautiful as they had been on that first day when their lives had intersected so dramatically. They never forgot what had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of the day, Jackson had paid Ophelia's debt. They would sit in that rocking chair together and tell their children the story of how they met. Joshua and Emma never tired of hearing it, the romantic tale of the cowboy who had given everything to save a woman he did not know. "But why did you do it, Papa?" Emma would always ask, even though she had heard the answer 100 times, and Jackson would always reply the same way. "Because sometimes, when you see someone in trouble, you help them. Not because you expect anything in return, but because it is the right thing to do. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that moment of kindness changes your whole life." One spring evening when Joshua was 15 and Emma was 13, they sat around the dinner table discussing plans for Joshua's upcoming journey to San Francisco, where he would learn more about the shipping and trade industry. It was a big step, sending their son so far away, but both Jackson and Ophelia knew it was necessary for his growth. "I will miss you terribly," Ophelia said, reaching across the table to squeeze her son's hand, "but I am so proud of you." "I will write every week," Joshua promised. "And I will be back by Christmas." After the children had gone to bed, Jackson and Ophelia sat on the porch in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the desert night. "We raised good children," Ophelia observed. "We did," Jackson agreed. "They are the best of both of us." "Do you remember when we were afraid I might never conceive?" Ophelia asked. "I was so heartbroken. But then Joshua came and Emma, and suddenly our family was complete." "I would have been happy either way," Jackson said honestly. "But I will admit that being a father has been one of the great joys of my life. Watching them grow, teaching them things, seeing them become their own people. It is miraculous. Everything about our life together has been miraculous," Ophelia said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly against him the way she always had. "From that very first day to this moment right now, we have been blessed beyond measure." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in a way that only decades of marriage could create. Then Ophelia spoke again, her voice soft. "Jackson, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past that day? If you had heard me crying but decided it was not your problem?" "Sometimes," Jackson admitted, "in the way you wonder about any major fork in the road. But it is hard to imagine because it feels so inevitable now, as if our whole lives were leading to that moment, like we were always meant to find each other." "I believe that," Ophelia said firmly. I believe that God or fate or whatever force governs the universe brought you to Mojave that specific day at that specific time because we belong together. You saved me, and in saving me, you saved yourself. Jackson considered her words and found them to be true. Before Ophelia, he had been adrift, moving from place to place without purpose or direction. He had been alive but not really living, going through the motions of existence without engaging with it. But that day when he had heard her crying and made the impulsive decision to help, everything had changed. He had found his purpose, his home, his heart. You know what I think, Jackson said. I think we saved each other. You needed someone to believe in you when everyone else had written you off. And I needed someone to believe in, someone worth staying for. We gave each other exactly what we needed most. Ophelia turned to kiss him, and even after all these years, the touch of her lips still sent warmth spreading through his chest. I love you, Jackson Ashford. Thank you for being brave enough to risk everything for a crying stranger. I love you, Ophelia Ashford. Thank you for letting me stay. As they sat together under the stars, Jackson thought about the younger version of himself who had ridden into Mojave with $412 and no clear direction. That young man had been running from pain and loss, convinced that solitude was safer than connection. He could never have imagined the life that awaited him, the love that would fill his days, the family that would give his life meaning. The road from that desperate moment in front of the banker to this peaceful evening on the porch had not always been smooth. There had been struggles and setbacks, moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, they had held fast to each other and to the commitment they had made. They had built their life brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. Years later, when Jackson was in his 60s and Ophelia's auburn hair had turned silver, they would sit in that same rocking chair and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Joshua had taken over most of the business operations by then, running it with the same dedication and integrity his parents had modeled. Emma had married a surveyor and moved to Sacramento, but she visited often with her own growing family. The house had been expanded multiple times over the decades, but the original structure remained, a testament to how far they had come. The freight business had evolved into a successful trading company with operations throughout California and into Nevada. The Ashford name was respected throughout the region, associated with fairness, reliability, and honest dealing. But all of that success, all of those accomplishments, paled in comparison to what Jackson and Ophelia had built between them. Their love had not faded or diminished with time. If anything, it had grown richer and deeper, seasoned by shared experiences, and strengthened by weathering storms together. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The house was filled with laughter and love, with multiple generations of the family that had started with one impulsive act of kindness. As Jackson looked around at all the people who existed because he had chosen to stop that day and help a crying stranger, he was overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Jackson and Ophelia sat once more on the porch. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together watching the sun set over the desert. 40 years, Ophelia marveled. It seems impossible and yet completely natural at the same time. The best 40 years of my life, Jackson said. Every single day with you has been a gift. Ophelia took his hand, her fingers still fitting perfectly with his despite the arthritis that now plagued them both. Do you remember what you said to me that first night, when I asked you why you had given away everything for a stranger? I said it seemed like the right thing to do. You did not know then that it would lead to all of this, Ophelia said. gesturing to encompass not just the house and land but the entire life they had built. You could not have predicted that one moment of compassion would create such abundance. No, Jackson agreed. But I think that is the nature of kindness. You do it not expecting reward, but because it is right. And sometimes the universe rewards you anyway. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in familiar shades of gold and orange. Jackson thought about all the sunsets they had watched together, all the evenings they had sat in this exact spot discussing their dreams and fears and hopes. This porch had been witness to their entire marriage, from those uncertain early days to this moment of peaceful satisfaction. "If you could go back," Ophelia asked quietly, "knowing everything you know now, would you do it again? Would you still give away all your money for a woman you had just met?" Jackson did not even have to think about his answer. In a heartbeat, every single time. "Because that money bought me a life worth living. It bought me you." Tears slipped down Ophelia's weathered cheeks. "And you gave me everything. Not just the money that saved my home, but hope when I had none. You gave me a reason to believe in goodness and love and the possibility of happiness. You gave me a family and a future and more joy than I ever thought possible." "We gave each other those things," Jackson corrected gently. "That is what partnership means, what love means." As darkness fell over the desert, they remained on the porch, two people who had built a remarkable life from the wreckage of loss and debt. The banker who had taken Ophelia's things that day would never understand the value of what he had inadvertently set in motion. He had seen only dollars and possessions, collateral and debt. But Jackson had seen something more precious, a woman worth saving, a connection worth pursuing, a future worth building. The cowboy had found her weeping as the banker took her things, and he had bought back every single one. But in doing so, he had gained something infinitely more valuable. He had found love, purpose, family, and home. He had found everything that mattered. And as Jackson and Ophelia sat together in the darkness, their hands intertwined and their hearts beating in sync after 40 years of marriage, they both knew that the best investment anyone could ever make was not in land or cattle or gold. It was in love, in kindness, in choosing to see the value in another human being and acting on that recognition. The stars emerged one by one overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the births of their children, and every moment of joy and sorrow in between. And under those ancient lights, Jackson and Ophelia Ashford held each other close and gave thanks for the day when a cowboy had heard a woman crying and decided to stop. It had been the first day of the rest of their lives, the moment when two lost souls had found each other in the vastness of the desert and created something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would tell the story to their children, and their children after that, a testament to the power of compassion and the transformative nature of love. As they finally rose to go inside for the night, Jackson paused and looked back at the desert stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there was the man he had been 40 years ago, young and directionless and alone. He wished he could tell that younger version of himself that everything would be all right, that the best years were yet to come, that choosing compassion over caution would lead to more blessings than he could possibly imagine. But perhaps that young man already knew on some level. Perhaps that was why he had stopped when he heard Ophelia crying, why he had reached into his saddlebag without hesitation and given away his entire fortune. Perhaps some part of him had recognized that he was not giving anything up at all, but rather making an exchange, trading money for meaning, security for love, loneliness for belonging. Inside the house, the rocking chair sat by the fireplace where it had always been, the same chair that had caused such anguish that first day. It was worn smooth now by decades of use, by Ophelia rocking her babies to sleep, by Jackson sitting with his wife in quiet companionship on winter evenings, by their grandchildren climbing into its embrace for stories. It was just a chair, made of wood and nails and time. But it represented so much more: preservation, persistence, the idea that some things were worth fighting for. That night, as they lay in bed together in the darkness, Ophelia whispered, "Thank you, Jackson, for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I did not believe in myself, for building this beautiful life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Jackson replied, "for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for sharing your life with a drifter who had nothing to offer but his heart." "Your heart was everything," Ophelia said. "Your heart was exactly what I needed." They fell asleep as they had for 40 years, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect complement in the middle of the harsh desert. And if the banker who had tried to take everything could have seen them then, perhaps even he would have understood that some things were beyond price, beyond possession, beyond the cold calculation of debt and payment. Love, Jackson had learned that day in 1882, was not something you could account for in a ledger or measure in dollars. It was the act of seeing another person's pain and choosing to share the burden. It was the willingness to sacrifice security for connection. It was the courage to stay when every instinct said to run. He had been a cowboy who found a woman weeping as the banker took her things, and he had bought back every single one. But the true purchase that day had not been furniture or possessions or even a house. It had been a future, a family, a love that would sustain them through decades and define the rest of their lives. And as morning light eventually crept through the windows of the house in Mojave, illuminating the rocking chair and the photographs on the walls and the two silver-haired figures still sleeping peacefully in each other's arms, it was clear that Jackson Ashford had gotten exactly what he paid for. Everything that mattered, everything that lasted, everything worth having in this world.